Hello and welcome to Forbidden Talk, a program dedicated to exploring sensitive social topics in the Middle East. Today we'll be focusing on sexual harassment in Egypt. According to a 2013 United Nations study, a staggering 99.3% of the surveyed women admitted to having been sexually harassed in everyday life in Egypt. But despite the large amount of women who are affected, many do not report their experiences. Talking about street harassment is considered a taboo, and many women feel ashamed and are even blamed for the assault. Meanwhile, many men deny it's even a problem. Today we'll be trying to get to the heart of why sexual harassment is such a widespread problem in Egypt, and how can real change come about, not just on paper, but culturally too. But before we move on, let's take a look at this brief report.
Fondling or catcalling. Egypt's streets have become notorious for sexual harassment. Harassment has long been a problem in Egypt, but peaked during and after the Arab uprising in 2011, with women being attacked during protests at Tahrir Square. A survey carried out by the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women in Egypt in 2013 revealed that 99.3% of women in the country had been sexually harassed in one form or another, out of which 96.5% said that harassment was physical and 95.5% experienced sexual harassment through verbally abusive language. The severity of the problem became even more evident last year after a video posted on social media went viral, purportedly showing a woman completely naked amid a crowd of men, as policemen struggled to escort her out of Tahrir Square during the inauguration celebrations of the newly elected president Abdel Fattah Al-Sisi. In an attempt to tackle the growing problem, the Egyptian government last year introduced a new legislation criminalizing sexual harassment. The law decrees that those found guilty of harassment in public or private will face up to 5 years in prison and a maximum fine of 50,000 Egyptian pounds. Activists say those measures aren't enough to tackle the problem. Several campaigns and movements have sprung up in recent years to try and stamp out what they say is an endemic culture of sexual harassment. Many are based around educating people about the issue and documenting instances. Other groups take more radical action, offering self-defense classes and organizing patrols in public squares. But while the issue has finally started to be addressed, it would seem that a rough road lies ahead to bring change.
Now I'd like to welcome our first Skype guest in Cairo, Nihal Zaghloul, an Egyptian activist who started the Basma imprint movement in the summer of 2012 in order to help stop sexual harassment and assault in the streets of Egypt. Nihal, before we get into your own story, how would you define sexual harassment, both verbally and physically?
It just says, as it says on the New York subway, if it's unwanted, then it's harassment. And so any kind of form, any kind of interference with somebody's personal space is considered harassment, whether it was verbal or physical.
Okay. And moving on to your own story, can you recall for us what happened on Cairo's Tahrir Square in June 2012?
It was a big month. Do you have a specific date that you want me to mention? Because June 2012 was full of sexual assaults incidents all throughout the month, and specifically on the 2nd of June, I witnessed a sexual assault that happened on a friend of mine, and I was miraculously saved. I still don't know how it happened, but it happened, and this is what motivated me to start Imprint, because I'm not a kind of a woman who's going to be sitting in a corner crying and wishing this never happened. It happened, and now we have to deal with it.
And how was she affected on a personal level?
She was quite devastated, and she left Cairo seeking for psychological help. She's still getting psychological help and meeting her therapist regularly.
Why did sexual harassment come to the forefront during the revolution? Some people say it was a political tool that was exploited. I mean, to what extent do you think this is true?
It's really hard to say in that way, but what I always believe is that whatever is personal or social has to be political. There's nothing that is social only, and there's nothing that is political only. Everything affects it. Like every aspect of our lives affect each other somehow. And so the fact that we don't have laws that says specifically or clearly that sexual harassment is wrong is a very political issue, and at the same time it's a social issue, because you cannot file the reports, you cannot get your, as a woman, I cannot say I want to file a report against sexual harassment because there is no law against sexual harassment at that time. So taking that forward and saying that we want to turn this into a political issue where I want laws, I want amendments to the laws that is there, then it makes it a political issue. And we didn't take advantage of it, we just used this aspect of our life to make us safer on the streets. Yeah?
And at that time, there were reports of thugs, people being paid to sexually harass women. How do you feel about that? Do you agree with that?
I'm not quite sure. It's really hard to say. Maybe there was like a gang or thugs sometimes that did this, but I'm pretty sure that people joined in because they don't consider women as a full human being, and therefore she doesn't have full rights. If you pay a thug or even 10 thugs to go and to protest to harass women, fine. But then most of the incidents that people testified to said it was more than 50 people, and you cannot pay 50 thugs to come to that. And above all of that, it also happened during Eid. So, and Eid is not a political, it's a social, or it's even a religious celebration. And it happens during Eid, it happens during any holiday that everyone can go to parks and stuff, and then they harass other women and assault them.
And what about on the everyday streets of Egypt? How have you experienced sexual harassment?
Definitely. I've experienced sexual harassment on a daily basis, especially verbal ones. Luckily, I haven't faced any physical ones for the past year, but it was verbal most of the time, especially that I have my hair cut short, and I don't, people don't see me as, I don't conform to what most of the women in Egypt dress like. And therefore, because I'm strange and because I stand out, I get more harassment than other women.
And what do you think goes through the mind of men when they stare like that? I mean, it's quite a leer, it's quite an intense look to threaten, isn't it?
It almost feels like, I almost feel pity for them, because it almost feels like they know they're not seen by women, they're not recognized by women, so they stare and hope that somebody notices them. But it's also the way that they do it, they're used to being aggressive about it, and this is the only way people will notice them. However, at the end of the day, I'm not giving them any kind of justification. So harassment is wrong and sexual harassment is wrong. Any kind of harassment is wrong and should be punished by law. It's just that it's really hard to go into the minds of a harasser other than this person wants to be identified or just want to be seen. That's when we talk about harassment on the streets on a daily basis.
Yeah. What are certain beliefs held about the victim? Because I know there are certain generalizations. That the woman is foreign, she has blonde hair. Can we address some of those? What are those beliefs?
They're completely delusional beliefs. The same people who tell you because she's not veiled or because she's dressed like this, they are the same people who harass women who are veiled, who are wearing the face veil or the niqab. They find some kind of justification to harass these women. Either this woman, or she's putting makeup and therefore she wants to be harassed, or she's laughing too loud, or she's smiling on the streets, or her walk, I don't like her walk, or so they find a justification to harass.
And some reports say that wearing a niqab actually provokes more attacks. Is this true?
I haven't read those reports, so I'm not quite sure if to say to that. But all I know is that all kinds of women get harassed on the street, and it does not matter what they're wearing or what they're doing. And I think that whenever we go into discussion and somebody says, okay, if somebody is totally covered and somebody's not totally covered, who do you think a harasser would harass? This is a trap. We do not fall into that. If the harasser was not there from the first place, nobody would be harassed. So it's not a problem of who is wearing what. The problem is the existence of a harasser.
Yeah. You mentioned your friend sought help outside of Egypt.
Yes.
Inside Egypt itself, I mean, what help, what support is offered to women who have been sexually harassed, say the state medics or even the media?
There's no such thing as trusting a state medic, and sadly enough. So it's always private doctors or private hospitals that you can go to, and they can help you. But the past sexual assault incidents to women who went to and women who went to the hospitals, the doctors performed virginity tests on them. And this was not this is not acceptable, and there's a whole backlash on them for that, but still nothing happened. So they're not trustworthy at all when it comes to issues of violence against women.
How did you set up the blog Basma? Can you talk me through that?
Basma is a movement, but my blog was totally independent, and I just wanted to write something that the form of a diary or a journal that would not let me forget what happened during starting the 25th of the revolution and Muhammad Mahmoud in 2011 and in 12 and so on. And then after the sexual assaults that I witnessed, and it happened not to just one friend of mine but several others, we started Basma, which is a movement to fight sexual harassment. And I had no idea it would grow that big, or I had any kind of vision that it would continue, but I had really good friends and I had really good colleagues that we developed the idea of Basma from just preventing sexual harassment during Eid and protests, but also to educate people and go to workshops and campaigns in universities, transportation systems, and it even went as far as collaborating with the human rights sector in the Ministry of Interior to be able to do such campaigns. So,
well, that's great. But talk to me a bit about what Basma actually does. Do you intervene in actual incidents of harassment?
Yes, that's true.
How does the establishment view you?
They see us as kids, essentially, and who want to help, not as a big part of, not as players in this issue. Like last Eid, we were supposed to go out and do like a patrol and to stop sexual harassment in downtown, and they did not give us clearance. For the first time in 3 years, we were not able to get clearance to work on the street. And the amount of it was not us, everyone who goes onto the streets was prevented. But the amount of sexual harassment and sexual assaults that was reported in Eid was massive, that we just didn't understand why would they not let us cooperate with them.
Why do you think?
We're still not sure. We're still trying to understand what kind of message that was sent from that. Others think it's a message of saying, the streets are ours, that the establishment is saying the streets are ours. Others think that it's part of the crackdown on NGOs and civil society in general. And others thinks that because they don't believe that our work is real work, and therefore they were like, not this time.
And are there equal numbers of men and women in your group?
Yes, we have more women slightly at this time of the year, Yani, but the past 2 years we were more men than women.
Okay. And you've stated that your ambition is to change how people view and act towards sexual harassment. What have you learnt from setting up Basma about people's mentalities in Egypt?
I've learned, first of all, that it's quite complicated and it's quite messed up as well, because in a way it feels like they're so controlled by the interpretation of religion, and they mix that with culture. So there is nothing in the interpretation of religion or the Quran that says women are not allowed out, or women are not allowed to work, right? Or that if a woman does not veil, harass her. But this is culture. And so when we talk to people and say, do not, harassment is wrong, and they say, but she's not veiled, for example, and we go like, fine, she's not veiled, but God did not tell you to harass her if she doesn't veil, right? And so on, and they go like, they stop and they start thinking, actually, okay, that's true. So they don't understand. And also, big part of it that I've learned is that most of the Egyptians have assigned themselves as guardians over the rest of the population. So as if it is their own duty to set straight everyone who does not conform to their culture.
Well, Nihal, we have to leave you now, but we're very grateful to you for sharing your
Thank you.
story. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Now joining us over Skype is Marta Agosti, a PhD candidate in social anthropology at London's SOAS. She's lived in Cairo since 2009, and her research looks into how ordinary women navigate political and economic structures and the societal issues that come with it. Marta, as a first question, because I'm asking all the ladies here today, how have you experienced sexual harassment on the streets of Egypt?
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for having me on board for this. Regarding your first question, I think if I recall well, my first experience was back in 2009 when I was working here in Cairo, and every day I had to go to work. And the guards in the embassy that I have to pass by every day were like blowing kisses and saying things to me. And I think my first reaction was to completely ignore it. But then later on, I realized that slowly I started to change things in my daily habits because these kind of incidents. So I think that's very common to many women here. And we started like thinking, how I'm dressing, on how I walk on the streets, or what is exactly, wondering what can I do, to change this. And then we realize that there's very little, that has to do with the way we are dressing, or if we are wearing this or that,
But it's interesting what you said, men of authority doing that kind of gives license to ordinary folk.
I think, the way it looks is like very bored, guards in the embassy at that time, But then it's true when later on we saw how the political, events deployed. We saw, the link between how many people in positions of authority feel somehow relaxed, to have these kind of behaviors on the street. And it kind of became the common sense, that they can behave this way on daily basis. Then there was another kind of events that were happening. That is when we had these big concentrations of people in football matches or later on in demonstrations. Then, I think many women became, and myself included, very aware that the mass, could turn against you, like flipped, at any given moment. And sadly, we became very familiar with this feeling.
And why actually do men harass women on the streets of Egypt? You mentioned boredom, but do you think they touch women for pleasure, or do they touch women as a punishment, say?
Well, it's a very complex mechanism, I think. And if you allow me, I will take a little minute, here to explain why I think. And I think this is my reflection and the reflection of many other people living and working and trying to give an explanation. I don't think men find much pleasure in harassing women in the street. I think there is a very ambivalent relation towards it. Because the same person that engaged in harassing a woman may be later on in the day like working or in a meeting or with friends playing football or even praying, So out of the context of sexual harassment, if you ask a common city male dweller about his current emotional status, it would mainly relate to kind of a general feeling of depression and lack of hope and fear. I think that's very present right now in the country. So I tend to think sexual harassment as a kind of a deformed or very perverse manifestation of citizenship, which is even, a very harmful one. And what I mean by that is that, unfortunately, this is one of the few expressions that can happen in the streets without being punished with the exception, of when it touches directly upon the reputation of the president. It's something that we can discuss later on. But what I mean by that is like we have to be aware that the streets or the politics of the streets have been subject to a strong regulatory process. And what we mean by that is like about the activity that can take place in the street. So at consequence, in Cairo, like positive manifestations of citizenship, like, I don't know, walking in the street or having a quiet coffee, street art, all these processes have been harder and harder to happen, Of course, demonstrations was the first casualty of this ultra-regulatory process because they are not allowed anymore and have serious repercussions. But there are many other activities, more subtle, that can happen in the street right now. So in this context, sexual harassment is like a very negative expression of that. You are allowed to do it somehow because it helps the authority to control this space, to make it uncomfortable. So it somehow pushes people away, And that was something that is from Mubarak's time and now. So answering your question is like my observations is not that men try to find pleasure on punishment. I think they just try to verify that they still possess somehow a presence in the street, that they can exercise power. And they do so on targets that they consider more vulnerable, which of course those are mainly women because and also children, which is a big question as well. So this kind of power toward brings, a kind of, in one hand, making feel empowerment, but at the same time, it's a reminder of their weak status and disposition, in the society where things are not going okay,
right?
And it's difficult to accomplish what it is expected from them,
because men feel powerless because of high unemployment rates. There's a lot of single men as well at the moment because they can't afford to marry. So Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, I was just saying this is a machismo. This is exerting their power on the streets.
Completely. I mean, it's a very perverse way of, that works in both directions. They can exercise some kind of power, but at the same time, it's a reminder of, look, like things are not okay. You are not able to provide to your family. You are not able to protect. You are not able to fulfill the expectations. And this is the controversy that we have,
And in that public framework, how involved have Egyptian women been in society or public life throughout history, in Egyptian history? How have they been viewed?
I think women have always been involved in society and public lives, as you say, because they have always composed half of the society. However, it has taken many different forms, and the form we relate the most, I think, as Europeans, in terms of their struggles, the composition as a movement, the way they speak, the subjects that they that we relate more, is something that happened since the British occupation. Since there, women's movements have been somehow attached to different regimes, like against the British occupation, then with Nasser, then with with Sadat, then with Mubarak, and now with Sisi, in something. And this has taken the form of something that they call the state feminism. And they have, they've been very present and they've been key in many subjects, What is important now is to see how, in the current situation, how women may react towards the state, like in the sense of like how are they able to put issues on the agenda that may be seen by the state as threatening the security or the nation or the reputation of the state. And this is when we have a problem and power relationships come along to somehow mute these kind of narratives that the state don't want to hear about. And sexual harassment is playing a big, stake into this kind of dynamics. And we need to be aware of when we tell the story, like women are participating, yes, they are. Who is participating? Many of them, but sometimes we don't get to tell the story of people that are not successful or people that, because their agendas they are not visible, or the government doesn't want them to be visible, which is something that has happened, you know.
But why has harassment been accepted for such a long time in Egypt?
Well, I don't think harassment is accepted. I don't think anybody accepts it. Harassment is endured. As I think as citizens in Cairo, we endure many forms of repression, and harassment is one of them. And also, we have to be aware that we have witnessed an uprising in Egypt that tried to overthrow many of these practices, with results that are very painful, because after 4 years, what we have is a reshuffle of the old practices that are coming back even stronger, bringing more pain and more suffer with the consent and support of the international community. So people here is quite aware of the consequences and how to pick up the battles and how they may end up. You know?
It's interesting, that word endured. Is this why so many women decide not to report their cases?
Well, I think we've been through many different phases on the reporting. At the beginning, it's true that it was a big cultural barrier that played against reporting. You know, there was this usual mantra of women's reputation and shame that we've all heard about. So even women that dare at that time to report, they were accused of, oh, you deserve it, or what have you done for this to happen to you, or things like that, you know. However, I think since 2008, you know, we had changed. There was the first report called Clouds in the Sky that put the issue on the table of the social media, the newspapers, everything. And at the same time, we had the creation of organizations such as Harassment, for instance, that the first day that they opened their application to report, they collapsed the server. I mean, there were so many people reporting that they couldn't take it. They had to shut down and reopen again with bigger facility. So people want to report. It's there. I think the cultural barrier is broken, and people is talking. Women and men that has been harassed, you know, are talking. However, there is a big gap between the reporting that people can do on the social media or through the NGOs and the reactions from the judicial system to create mechanisms to protect and bring justice to the survivors. And this is a big gap that we need to understand. First, because in many cases when some survivors have reported, they were discouraged in the police station. There is not really, policemen were not really trained on how to deal with this case, what is the legal procedure, and also there were questions of security, anonymity, and confidentiality, because the names were filtered to the media, and then, you know, people then knew where these people lived or where do they work, and that was dangerous. Mm-hmm. And second is that even if they went through all this hassle to report and put the claim and initiate a prosecutor, you know, then very few cases have found justice. So of course, you know, I think people are reporting to the extent that they can, but they are also measuring, you know, the consequences of bringing it further.
But of course, there's the new law set up last year, the sexual harassment law. How many men have actually been prosecuted now? Do we have any ideas of numbers?
Yeah, well, there is. I think we need to put the question of the law a bit in an historical background, because that will explain why there's so few cases, that have been prosecuted. So, as I said, we have since 2005-08 more and more initiatives growing and working on sexual harassment. Since 2011, there was a boom on organizations focusing on this subject, that they have brought evidence, and they have worked on law drafts, they have lobbying authorities and blah, blah, and there was no much success in that sense, until there was one case that happened in June 2014 during the celebrations of the inaugurations of Sisi presidential elections. And at that time, it happened a very, very ugly case of sexual assault during the celebrations. And there was a video that went viral, and somehow it touched upon the reputation of the president itself, because you know how can he allow something like this happen during his celebrations? So it was the first time that we saw a direct reaction from the authorities, and the president went to see the victim and passed the law and sentenced people. You know, so the several perpetrators got life sentences because there was an agglutination of different. I mean, they were accused of several things, not only of harassment. Since then, somehow the situation is blocked. Later on, there was a statement from different NGOs where basically we're saying like, okay, we appreciate this as a beginning, but this is not the end of the story. All previous crimes of sexual violence must be investigated. And this hasn't happened yet. And of course, with the current environment where we have the anti-protest law, the NGOs law, and a lot of activists in jail, so many of these people that have been working since 2005 and 2008, they don't feel like pushing that much for that because they are not really sure what the consequences may be for the personal lives, you know.
Yes.
So they are in a quite difficult situation, I think.
President Al-Sisi, of course, in reaction to that video going viral, did take steps, but he also didn't want it, he wanted to stop it going viral. He wanted to stop it actually being on the internet, didn't he?
Yeah.
Why is this? To taint the reputation of the Egyptians or for tourism?
Because of course, you know, they are very concerned with the idea of what images are going out from Egypt, you know. So Egypt has to be this country where people come, see the pyramids, you know, it's a magnificent country, it's a beautiful country, which all this is true, you know, it's an amazing, it's very, very, you know, Dunya, they call it. And all this, so they don't want anything that can taint, you know, somehow the reputation of the state as, you know, bad things can happen here, basically.
I mean, presumably these men have mothers, sisters, and even daughters. Do they bear no sense of shame for their actions?
I guess, I don't know, as I said before, sexual harassment, what is clear for me is an expression of power over more vulnerable people. But I think this brings along many mixed feelings of empowerment, as I said, but also of guilt and shame, of course. However, I think we need to address the questions of masculinity, you know, like how do men navigate the impossibility to achieve what society expects from them, to better understand the whole picture. And I think this is the current challenge that we have as researchers.
Do you believe people have become desensitized to sexual harassment in Egypt because it's rife?
No, I don't think so. I think, I mean, that would be very difficult to measure in itself, but taking, for instance, my own personal experience is like, we deploy different strategies along the time, depending on your energy, the anger, your personal and emotional status in each moment. And as a result, every day you decide to pick up different battles, no? Sometimes you decide to ignore it, sometimes you decide to go with it, you know, like let it go, you know. But it's important to highlight that many associations keep working on sexual harassment. And these movements are inside universities, NGOs, they are very active in Facebook, in Twitter. The problem is that, as I said at the beginning, working at the street level is almost impossible right now. So, of course, even the presence of these NGOs is very reduced. So we may also have the feeling that somehow the issue is dropping, but it's not. I think, you know, there is a constant work behind the scenes, you know, on the subject, and it's something that is very much discussed, you know, when we do awareness sessions or when things like that. Yeah.
Well, Marta, that's all we have time for today, but thank you so much for participating.
Anytime. I hope it was clear, okay for you.
It was very clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Now we are joined in Cairo by Colette Gounem, documentary filmmaker of The People's Girls, a film on harassment in Egypt. Colette, as a first question, how have you experienced sexual harassment on the streets of Egypt?
Yes, so sexual harassment comes in many different forms. I've experienced, thankfully, no physical harassment, but verbal and even just staring counts as harassment. You feel violated just when men are staring when you're walking. Yeah, it's a major issue for both foreigners and Egyptians alike. It's a major problem that we wanted to address.
And can you talk to us about why you were incited to make the film in the first place?
Yeah, so my partner, I'm doing this film with my film partner, Tina, and we were creating a project that would try to show who is actually to blame for this issue, because oftentimes women are put as the source of why this is happening, their clothes and such things. So we were excited to see what people really thought about this issue. Tina was actually already making a photography project about it, and I really wanted to create a film, so we decided to join forces to make the film together.
It's interesting you received funds to make your film through crowdsourcing, Kickstarter. Obviously, there's a great demand to see your film being made globally. Were you surprised by the amount of support and where it came from?
Yeah, we were shocked that people from all around the world were contacting us being like, we love the idea, we have the same problem in Brazil, we have the same problem in New York, the same problem in India, the same problem in France. People were contacting us from literally around the world. So it was something that we were really, and even in Egypt as well, many Egyptians supporting the project. So we were very pleasantly surprised how many people are supporting this issue and trying to resolve it.
Now, it might be top secret, but can you just talk to us a little bit about what does your film document?
Yes, so what we're focusing on is blaming the victim. The idea that the victim is the one who is always at fault because of either what she's wearing or how she's walking or her behavior, and that not much blame is put on the one who's actually doing the violating. So our main topic is talking to women, interviewing people on the street, what are the thoughts of people, and also we want to focus on how women are supposed to respond. Because oftentimes people think that, oh, it's better if she just stays silent and she ignores the problem. But as we've seen, when women start to respond, men think of them not only as objects, but as people, the human beings that are being affected by what they're doing by harassing women. So we wanted to see what exactly is the best response to when you are harassed, and we're going to speak to women about that, and men as well.
Do you think the majority of women are submissive, or just plod along with it, or actually are they quite feisty and they sort of stand up for themselves? Because you do hear a lot of stories coming from Egypt of women just shouting back at men or shaming them in public.
Yeah, now I feel like it's becoming such more exposed now that I think now it's more normal for women to respond to their harassers. But before, no, it's not like appropriate for women to respond because that's not respectful. That's not what respectful women do. But now I do see that women that we've talked to are more encouraged to talk back or to.
Is this since legislation has been set up in place last year, or since just social media in general has highlighted this issue?
Sorry. What was the question?
Why do you think that this is? What's triggered this?
Well, I think yes, that the exposure has risen dramatically from the social media videos coming out of women being violated, sexually assaulted, which then in turn enforced the law in the Constitution that says that now there are punishments against harassers. And yeah, I think the exposure to the issue and women speaking out more and more is what is causing it to come out. Because people are posting their stories on Facebook, people are posting their stories all over in the media.
You've spoken a lot about the power of a video going viral. It can obviously raise awareness for a moment. It might unite people, and hashtags might feel cathartic for a lot of people in the world. But can it really bring about change?
Well, okay, I think it depends how far it goes, because if it only stops at, oh, look at this is so bad, and then that's it, then no, of course, it needs more awareness and more action instead of just writing things on the internet. But I do see that, for example, the things with Sandra Black and things going on in the US with racism and police brutality, things have changed dramatically because of people breaking hashtags and sharing the videos and stories and news, and now there has to be legislative responses to what's going on, and the government is now responding. And that's exactly what happened with the video from Tahrir last year when the woman was assaulted. President Sisi went to visit the woman in the hospital because there was so much exposure to the issue. So now it's being enforced during Eid. Now there's security forces all the time in Tahrir Square and in majorly crowded areas. So I do feel that it is very effective in not only exposing the issue, but actually transforming political policies and action on the ground.
Yes, it's harder to hide, isn't it? And what do you think anyone or everyone can do today that will make a difference or could make a difference?
About harassment?
Yeah. Yeah,
so a big issue is the bystander effect, is that when you see someone getting harassed, or you see a woman not comfortable with a guy talking to her, or he did something touching her, you like to get involved. Like, I know sometimes people think that it's dangerous or that it's not right to get involved, but if you see that the situation, that there's people around and that nobody's doing anything, you take the first step to be able to be like, oh, that she has a problem, that I should get involved, I should say something or get authorities.
Because that's certainly not the norm, is it? People don't really react in the streets.
No, people just, like, if there's a thief, okay, we'll get involved, but if it's a harasser, it's not that big of a deal, let it go.
And have you seen that maybe change recently?
Well, so I'm talking to women. I do feel like some people are starting to be more like, okay, like telling him to leave, telling him to stop bothering her, but not as strong as I would want it to be, or that it should be.
Okay,
yeah.
Well.
So there's still more progress.
Absolutely, we remain hopeful. Well, Colette, we that's all we have time for, but thanks so much for being with us today, and good luck with the film.
Thank you.
Okay. Now welcoming over the phone in Cairo is women's rights advocate and researcher Dalia Abdelhamid, head of the gender program at the Egyptian Initiative for Personal Rights. Dalia, as a first question, how have you experienced sexual harassment on the streets of Egypt?
It depends on what we are talking about. I think I prefer to call it sexual violence, because what we've witnessed throughout the past few years was more than sexual harassment. And on a daily basis, yes, we might experience catcalling and the normal verbal harassment. Sometimes it is physical, but during specific festivities and big protests and in concerts and in very crowded metro stations, what's happening is another form of collective and mass sexual violence against women. And this phenomena has started years before 2011, but reached a new level with the mass protests in 2012. But now, because of the shrinking of the public space, there is no occurrences of such incidents except in celebrations of the feast and similar festivities.
Dalia, women were at the forefront of the Egyptian revolution. So why are women being treated like this now?
It has nothing to do with being fighters in the revolution or not. We've been treated like this before, during, and after the revolution. Actually, as I told you, because of so many different reasons now, we can say by just anecdotal evidence that sexual harassment might be less this year than other years. Part of this is because the shrinking of the public space, as I told you, but also there was amendment in the law, and for the first time the Egyptian state is talking publicly against sexual violence. So we might say that we have a kind of deterrence.
Dalia, with the threat of women being harassed in Egypt's streets, how do women find the courage to protest?
You have to find the courage to do the smallest thing in Egyptian street as a woman. In specific times, just walking down the street to grab a bottle of water or to do anything was extremely difficult because of the severity of catcalling and sometimes physical harassment. So I think that the presence of women in public space in Egypt is an act of bravery in itself, but it is also a defeat that if we said that because of sexual violence we are not going to protest again, or we are not going to demonstrate again, or we are not going to our work again. Some women, unfortunately, did this, and this is their total right, but so many women refuse to do this. But actually we are now on the protest and demonstration level, we are defeated because of political reasons, not because of sexual violence.
Mm-hmm. And is this a problem with the system or with society as a whole?
It's a very complicated problem. Part of it is the state, and another part is the society. And we believe that the state and the regime would deliver specific direct and indirect messages to the society, and the society would act upon these messages. So if the state, like the Egyptian state, is also itself a perpetrator of sexual violence, and its security system enjoy complete impunity for the crimes they are doing in terms of sexual violence, the society would also normalize with such a phenomena, and will also the state be reluctant from implementing the laws and persecute the perpetrators and the harassers. The society would also think that this is unpunishable crime.
And what are your views on education? How can men and women be better educated? Do you think that the problem lies in education?
Part of it is in education. There is no comprehensive sexuality education. There is no curriculum that enforce and reaffirm gender equality. But not only in education, it's in all fields, in the medical services, in people's convictions, in the media, and how the media is tackling and addressing problems of sexual violence. So the response for such a thing should be multi-sectoral.
Well, Dalia, thank you so much for your expertise today. It's been a great honor to have you on the show. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's where we have to leave it today, unfortunately. As we have heard today, all the women we have spoken to have experienced some form of sexual harassment in Egypt. A woman being intimidated by a leering gaze on her way to work may seem trivial in comparison to a woman being molested and raped by a mob in Tahrir Square. Yet these both stem from the same issue, an inherent lack of respect for women. There needs to be a shift in society's perspective with regards to sexual harassment. This is not to say that all Egyptian or Arab men are harassers. Nevertheless, tough efforts must be exerted in order to restructure public spaces in Egypt as safe and equal in rights for both men and women. We can all play a part, even if it means, at the very least, sharing a video campaign or retweeting an activist link. The stronger the voice, the quicker and more powerful the change. There is no justification to sexual harassment. I'd like to thank all my guests on today's program: Nihal Zaghloul, Marta Agosti, Dalia Abdel Hamid, and Colette Gunem. Until next time, goodbye.